All right, hello and welcome. It is Tuesday, November 28th, and first off, I hope you had a nice Thanksgiving break, fall break, I guess, officially, there last week. And we are meeting here to begin week 2. You have finished out your first round of assignments here, and we are going to start out our session with a discussion of, or doing a discussion of the submissions that came in, doing a bit of peer review for the 2D platformer composition that you worked on last week. So we have a total of 9 submissions here. And so I will kind of discuss overall how the project will work and what we're listening for and what we should be paying attention to. And we'll then go through each one of them, listening to the different submissions. And I typically find that while this whole process is really great for the individual, for the 9 people that submitted, I also think it's extremely beneficial for all of those, for everybody, because you get to see everybody else's version of it. You get comments on your own submission, but you get to see a whole bunch of other people and how they actually approach this project also. And so you'll see the good stuff, you'll see the bad stuff. We'll talk about, hey, this person did this generally, and this worked, and this is a good direction to go. Or, hey, a whole bunch of people did this thing over here, and you might want to avoid that. You'll basically get a whole bunch of insight into things that never even crossed your mind and how to approach this project. And I think that's while individual feedback is all well and good, seeing everybody else's version of this certainly puts it into perspective. So we'll go through these, and then I'll turn it over to the archive, which has a discussion of the new assignments for week 2. You'll be getting into your second composition, your second round of sound design, and we will it'll discuss the new game and a new overall approach. So let's go ahead and dive into these submissions. So as you might be able to parse here, let's see. Each student submission, well, actually, let me even take one step back and say that, let me go to FSO here and just show you, hopefully you know exactly what I'm talking about here, but each week there is a peer review and feedback submission that is optional. So here we are in week 1. I guess not. That's not where I want to be. I want to preview everything. Okay. So here we are in week, or let's say we just finished week 1. Week 1 optional feedback and peer review. So we had a couple different submissions here. And so each week you have the opportunity to submit, and I will basically load up everybody's submission in Logic, and we'll all listen to it. And so again, if you're able to come to the live sessions, then we can discuss it and talk about every aspect of it, and you can ask questions. Or even if you can't, then you can still check everything out in the archive. One slight difference is I think that the broadcast quality of GoTo training is less than optimal and is mono, probably still mono, and not the highest resolution, but the digital capture that I do for the archive is full stereo, full bandwidth, all that stuff. So if there's anything maybe dealing with panning that you might not catch through the direct live archive or the live stream, the quality is captured in the archive. Okay, so with each student submission, we had 9 submissions. Each student has their own track, and we have the 9 files that were submitted. Well, let me zoom back out. Each one of these tracks has 9 files on it. This column over here is all of the main loops. The main loops are 8 bars long, so you can see they're all a little bit longer. These are all of the intros These are each 2 bars long, and these are all of the endings. And they're only in this order because that's how they alphabetically order when I drag them in. That's how they arrange themselves. So we're going to be jumping around a little bit here, going track by track, discussing overall each person's submission, and we'll listen to them one at a time. And we'll start out with the main loops focused on there because that gives us most of the quality and the kind of feel of the music. And then we'll listen to the intros and endings to hear how we basically build up into the main loops and resolve down from the main loops. So that is the layout of everything. Let me go through each section, main loops, intros, and endings, and just kind of discuss generally, before we talk about any specific submission here, what we are listening for. So here are all the main loops. We had 3 main loops we had 3 main loops, and you had 3 groups of 3 overall for the 9 files. And those 3 main loops play through the majority of the gameplay. As the player is playing the game is randomly choosing one of these main loops to play, playing it from the start and going all the way through. So the main loops, first and foremost, have to loop. They have to make sense where they start and where they end, that they can seamlessly transition from the ending back to the start as invisibly and as seamlessly as possible. Also, any one of these main loops has to be able to jump over to any of the other main loops whenever needed. So whenever you reach the end of one particular loop, you basically hit a 3-pronged fork in the road. The music can either jump back to the top of the main loop, jump over to the next second main loop, or then over to the third main loop. And so you want to make sure that those transitions are as seamless as possible, not only returning back to the top, but being able to jump over to any of the other cues. So maintaining instrumentation, maintaining just consistency overall, a consistent tempo, time signature, key, and make sure that you finish your musical thought as you progress through the 8-bar loop. One big thing we want to watch out for is repetition, basically ending your musical thought too early and just saying it over again. Sometimes often what I'll hear is an 8-bar loop is actually made up of 2 4-bar phrases that just repeat over again. And the game is going to loop anyway, and so it's going to get repetitive anyway. You don't want to make it any more repetitive by splitting an 8-bar loop into a 4-bar loop and just repeating it over and over again. Or I've heard a 2-bar loop played 4 times, or a 1-bar loop played 8 times. It gets really monotonous very quickly, so you want to make sure you use the full 8 bars to develop your musical idea. Your choice of instrumentation needs to be consistent through each one of the cues. Drums, bass, harmony, melody. Certainly a strong melodic lead that develops through each one of these 8-bar cues. A consistent mix, nothing really sticking out too far in one or another of the cues. So just looking at these generally, these look like they're set up to loop. These files are going to have a gap at the end of each one, and when I see that, when it's the exact same amount of time, that is typically because when you bounce, it is include audio tail. You want to make sure that this is off. Turn off include audio tail because that will add a little bit of silence, and it's going to be after the same amount of time after it decays to silence. So want to watch out for those, or else every single time it loops, there's going to be this nice gap as when it tries to jump from one to the next. Watch out for anything where the music seems to fade out, fade to silence. So you want to make sure, because you don't want everything to end and then just start all back over again when the file loops. These look like they're set up and ready to go. These look like they're bounced very loud. There's very little dynamics to them. This one kind of looks like it tails off. I don't know that these are going to loop. These look like they're good. These look like they're good, although this third one looks quite different overall, but that's just a waveform. These look good, and these look good. Oops. So those are general things that we're listening for in the main loops. Of course, none of that means anything until we listen to it. So these intros here have a huge gap at the end of those. You're going to watch out for that. Maybe something like this. So the intros, this whole column here, these are all going to basically butt up next to any one of the main loops. And any three of these intros have to make sense going into any of the three main loops. So we are going to be listening for mainly consistent instrumentation. Anything that you have, drums, bass, harmony, melody, any of those layers, that instrumentation that you have in the main loops should also be represented in the intros and endings. Intros are typically, are meant to build up. They're supposed to rise in intensity. They're supposed to feel like they are increasing in energy, so that wherever the intensity, the mix, the volume of the main loops, wherever they are at, by the end of the intros, you also need to be there. So typically drum fills or sort of a roll or a build. Bass kind of builds up. Chord progression kind of starts and rises. And the melodic lead. A lot of times I'll either be missing the melodic lead or maybe the drums. Like they just don't exist in the intros and endings. So watch out for something like that. So most of these look good. Watch out for those gaps. These look good. These look like they might have a gap at the end. I don't know. It could be a rest also. We'll listen to it. These look good. These look like they have a gap. These look good. The intros can have gaps at the end because the music is ended at that point. You don't need maybe this a long amount of silence. I mean, it depends on if it's has a crazy long reverb tail or cymbal crash or something like that. But most of the time you can take stuff like this and edit it down. But in the endings, it certainly is necessary that you reach silence, that you end with silence. Yes, these are the endings. Did I say the endings? So the endings are okay to actually and should reach silence. So you don't want them to be cut off. Like these look like they're going to be cut off by the end. These look like they get really, really close, but they actually do look like they end. These do end, but they're too long. Although the power of these, it doesn't look like the same instrumentation waveform as kind of this. So watch out for a whole lot of instruments disappearing in the endings. These look like the right shape. So endings need to end. Number one, they need to reach silence. They need to resolve whatever progression, whatever energy, whatever drum pattern should be tied up with a nice bow to end that cue, to end the music. Now, they don't have to be they don't really have to be a nice resolution. You can have things like the band kind of falls apart, where everything was going at a strong pace through the main loops, and then all of a sudden you ended the game, you died in the game, and so the band kind of just loses all rhythm and kind of falls apart. Filter sweeps or bit crushing or big reverbs or delays or something, or everything's in a major key and then your endings end with minor and dissonance or something like that, where you can have a more traditional shouldn't be shaving a haircut. I have had that. Shouldn't be that. But like a more traditional resolution, or you could have kind of go in a more different, interesting way. You have a little bit more freedom in the endings. Since the intros are headed towards the main loops, main loops have to maintain the main loops have to maintain the energy and maintain the pace, and endings certainly need to end. Now, here in the chat, I thought we had to stay in the same key, referring to the endings. It probably, the first point, the square one would be, yes, keep it in the same key and resolve it. But certainly, and when I say minor, relative minor, I mean, I guess you could try going all over the place, but typically there could be a traditional ending, or you could have some more fun with it. Okay. So that is an overview of what we are listening for. Let me know. I'll be answering questions in the chat. Just go ahead and post those up as we go. And yeah, all right. Let's give it a try. We'll start with the first one here. Make sure I have every one of them muted. All right. Something like that. All right, let's see how this works. So structurally, everything works. It's going to be set up to loop. Everything fits within the 8 bars, so it will play back and function correctly in the game. I think choice of instrumentation works. General vibe works. I would think the most would be the melodic development. Well, actually, no. A number 1 is metronome. There's metronome back in there somewhere. So, and it's not me, I don't think. No, it's not me. So, so definitely always double check your bounces. Never trust that what you bounce is actually what you meant to bounce. Yeah, I mean, and the metronome's kind of hard to pick up because it is part of the, I mean, it's right on beat. But yeah, always double check before you deliver to a client. Make sure the bounces are actually what you expect. So. And then would be melodic development and I guess rhythmic and harmonic development. Most noticeably would be the melodic development, basically the phrasing of the melody. Just repeating the same phrase. You're moving up the chords, you're basically hitting chord tones, and as the chord changes, the melodic notes change, but the rhythmic pattern and the phrasing doesn't change. So work on just moving through the melodic, moving through that scale, or moving through the key that you're in, focusing on the chord tones, but just meandering around between them, so it's not so predictably do 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 do, especially when you go from one to the next. And then behind that, the progression. As I've been paying attention to it, I think its progression's the same, rhythm's the same, I'm going to guess bassline's the same, so maybe some of the rhythmic patterns are different in some of the instrumentation in the background, but a little bit, change up the drums, change up the pattern of the drums, change up the chord progression from one to the next. And that should probably also give you new space to move in the melody. 3 intros. Cool. So there is slight variations in the second half. Do-do, do-do, do-do. like little phrasing. But I would kind of move away from the kind of first bar, second bar kind of phrasing of these. Also have the drums. You do a build or a roll or some sort of more energy through those. So whether it's just a snare fill or you go full on toms and or if it could just be just kind of a pickup fill. And endings, I'm gonna guess that these get pretty close to ending, but you may need to add a little bit extra space at the end. End on this last chord, which looks like it is what, beat 2 of bar 2, right? So and really you do melodically, harmonically end, but the rhythm just keeps going a little bit. So and just kind of hold that last chord, and that'll get everything out of the way. Right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 3. Sorry, the 3 of beat 2. Bar 2. Yeah. So again, overall, it works for the project. It will functionally play back correctly. It'll transition nicely. It'll loop nicely. All of that stuff. But just kind of develop the ideas that you have been doing. Just develop those a little bit further through each one of them, and get rid of the metronome, and it'll be good. All right. Very cool. All right. So barring the gaps at the end of the file, let's see what else we got here. So I think that one of the biggest challenges here is the repeating phrasing. All right, so that is 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3, 4. So that's basically a 2-bar phrase that's going to repeat 4 times through there. The kind of like whistle lead, and then there's some low brass in there. Those 2 layers seem to follow each other very directly. Let's move on to the next one. Like the MIDI's just copied from one instrument to another. So separate the lines, create separate movement between those instead of having them just follow each other. And then we've got I don't know, the whistle synthy kind of lead thing and the brass. Maybe it's like a calliope or something. And then the drums. And yeah, here in the chat, just a little bit of counterpoint. So we have the melodic harmonic instruments and the drums, but there really feels like there's a gap in there. And the fact that there's no chord progression makes it feel like there's no harmony or bass. Like it's 2 melodic lines that are, well, 2 instruments that are playing the same melodic line, and then drums. So we need some sort of chord progression in there. Some sort of chord progression in there, bass line, and then the drums feel like they're on permanent fill or something, instead of more of a straight ahead rhythm. So you should have more just kick, snare, hi-hat, and then just slightly mix it up from one to the next. Much more straight ahead rhythms, chord progression, bass, and then separate the two melodic lines to give you more of a kind of a structured main loops. 3 intros. Okay, there's your chords. Those chords should also be present somehow through the main loops. Watch out for the cymbal crashes at the end of each one, because let's see if I can make this happen. If I were to do something like this, maybe. I don't know that this is rhythmically going to work, but you'll cut off the cymbal crash. It's not perfectly correct, but it basically gets the idea that rhythmically 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3, 4, boom. It's going to cut off that last cymbal crash. So watch out for cymbal crashes here. There. Watch out for cymbal crashes here. And let's see what this last one does. Okay, so, and then, yeah, watch out for that fill. So more instrumentation, I think, will help fill out the mix in these. And 3 endings. Oops. Yeah, actually, this one, let me go back to these. Do the intros have the brass in it? No. Yeah, the intros seem to be missing that brass instrument, so it is just the drums and the, I'm going to say calliope. So make sure you're using that, because it shows up the first bar of ending 2. You could see that works as an ending overall, as long as you maybe have a little drums in there, but it's like womp 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 womp. So maybe you could fill out like the main loops and the rest of the instrumentation with more brass, maybe some like a piano or something like that. So yeah, I think you're heading in the right direction. Watch out for the repetition through the main loops. Watch out for all the gaps at the end of the files. Make sure to have any instrumentation that you add to the main loops. Make sure you also add those to the intros and endings. Very cool. In the chat, that's so funny. Wah, 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 wah. It worked. It worked very well. Got to get the guy on the trombone with the mute. Wah, wah. All right. Next one here. Main loop. Actually, let me check these loops here, because everything has a rest there. Well, oh, okay. So the rest works, but there's a little tiny gap at the end. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, 4. 2, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, there's a little tiny gap rhythmically messing with the loops. Because the rest is fine, but I think that little bit of gap interrupts it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. 2, 3, 4. I don't know. It feels really close, or maybe it's in the beginning. Oh, there's a little bit in the beginning too. Maybe that's what I'm hearing. That one doesn't really seem to have it. I don't know. Just check your loops, check your edits. Like counting, it feels all right, but there's just a little bit of some gap in there that's throwing me off on the loop. Okay, musically, I think it fun instrumentation. I like. Well, there's an interesting mix of like traditional drums, and you got the marimba in there. But then you have the really synthy kind of alien kind of lead sound. It was kind of difficult to interpret in the main loop. I think it became, maybe you moved up an octave or something, became more melodic. I'm talking about the lead sound. Became more melodic and more recognizable as the lead in main loop 2, although it was kind of lower in volume. Although the marimba could also be used as the lead. Also, it's kind of just there's more movement in the marimba through there, so maybe that's supposed to be the lead. Well, whatever it is, make sure that it's out front the most and kind of the focus. There is some element of that synthy sound, especially in this first one, that feels like more of the distortion than the melodic elements to it. So, so you might actually double up that lead with something that is more kind of straightforward synthy and more melodic synth, and kind of mix them together, have them play the same melodic part, but mix them as layers. But yeah, definitely some good ideas in there. And 3 intros. I like the little guitar chunks in there. I would say I was like real guitar, where we have a kind of a lack of we don't particularly like MIDI guitars through a lot of stuff, but something to watch out for. But I think just little chunks like that actually work pretty well. There's just some movement in there. You can hear it. Maybe more build-up from the drum kit to give a bit more energy through there. So let's go ahead and check out the next one here. Oh, sorry, the endings. Cool. Just hear these end again. Yeah, maybe just extend it out a little bit longer to allow. I kind of feel that synth note can extend out just a little bit, especially here. It does definitely get cut off there. Oops, whoa, where are you going? This one. Yeah, it just kind of gets cut off. So actually that leads me to kind of a more generic comment for everybody. The endings, again, with the endings you can have a little bit more room. The endings musically need to end within 2 bars. The audio file, however, does not need to end in 2 bars. If you need to leave a little bit of room, like this, a little bit extra decay and reverb and all that stuff that just kind of gets cut off because it is 2 bars, then you can have a little bit of room. So you can end early. You shouldn't just end on like beat 1 of your ending, but you can end before the end of bar 2. And you can go a little bit long if you have any decay or reverb tail. So musically, need to somewhere within those 2 bars need to end. But if you need to leave a little bit extra room for that extra synthy reverb goodness as it fades out, feel free to do that. All right, but musically, everything resolves nicely back to the tonic. Everything wraps up with a nice bow at the end. Everything hits that last chord, that last drum hit, and gets fades to silence. So, all right, nice work overall. I think that definitely works. There's a few tweaks in there, maybe some of the the small bit of looping things that we're hearing in the main loops. Little small tweaks, but overall, it works out well. All right, how are we doing? 5 of 9. Okay, we're 4 of 9. Cool. We're doing just fine. All right. What else? All right, main loop. Whoa, let's turn that. Different volume. Okay. Not too much to complain about there. Excellent work. Rhythmically, has a strong energy. Harmonically, the progressions work out very well. I think I'm hearing some Christmas carols around this time of season that has the same great harmonic movement and development in there. Some great progression and changes throughout. And melodically also goes right along with that development. Very nice. Good changes in the first half and second half. The only thing I would throw out there is they actually feel like they're 16 bars long instead of 8 bars long. 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3, 4, 3, 2, 3, 4, 4, 2, 3. So, and that's a quarter of it. And I'm just counting on the snares on 2 and 4. So, well, obviously, I guess if you're going to I would call this more of a halftime kind of feel. I've had this this discussion a number of times with folks about where they are, where their tempo is, and where their halftime and double time. So I certainly won't argue, and it's not it's twice as depends on where you count it, but it's twice as much overall, which is perfectly fine. It's better than being half enough. Isn't 2 bars 2 bars? Well, it depends. Yes, written on a piece of paper, and that is been determined by the composer? Yes. And so I have certainly had discussions with folks where they say, I'm at 90 BPM, and well, they're actually at 180, but writing at a halftime kind of feel. So it's if you are looking at the bars of the actual session, it's don't follow the session at all, because I just keep it at 120, and everybody's tempos are different. Yeah, I would say more that counting, especially since you're starting on, come on. Yeah, you're starting on that. You would be like, is this double time? And this is the straight ahead kind of rhythm? I would say that this is half time, and this is the straight ahead rhythm. So as long as you are within the ballpark here, and which means that you are, depends on how you're counting, and as long as you're 16 bars over or whatever, you're twice as long versus half as long, that's perfectly fine. But anyway, not much to complain overall with all of that. I think it works out very well for the style and the energy, especially for the game. And I'm going to guess that these intros and endings are going to fall right in line with all that. Cool. So these intros would state that this is the regular time, and then this is double time, and then 3, 4, 3, 4, 3, 2. Yeah. So that is we'll go with yours, your approach there, that those are going to be 2 bars and 8 bars. That works perfectly fine. Endings. Cool. Yeah, so very nice. I think everything flows. I can only assume that it matches as it moves around. Melodically, harmonically, thumbs up. So yeah, nice work. Lots of good things. All right. First thing I'm going to guess with this one is mix. Just I don't see the dynamics going through there, so let's take a listen. Well, these are... So these, I guess, would have the opposite problem. They're 4 bars, I guess. I would count these as 2 bars, but 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 4 bars. Because you hear that 8-note bass, and once the drums come in there, you can definitely hear the 8-bar phrasing. Or sorry, the 4-bar phrasing. Okay, so extend them out. They feel more like rises. That's probably just the last bar of that. Watch out for the ending through, like this kind of pause or stop at the end of main loop 3. Okay, so what this feels like is the the first 4 bars, this is the next 4 bars, and this is the third 4 bars, and then it ends, right? So this is bass line. This is bass line plus hi-hats and a lead line. And then this is lead line. This one would be the most like fleshed out overall. So here we go. Sounds like a progressive drum and bass song. Yeah, I mean, energy-wise and instrumentation, it works. It just needs to be. It should definitely be developed. So take it basically from main loop 3 and extend it on from there. So drums work, melody works. You just could definitely have another 4 bars of phrasing and then do that for the 3 main loops. These feel more, because with these rising up with more instrumentation, as it jumps around between them, you're going to have like more instruments and less instrument, and it'll just like build and recede over and over again. So watch for that. Let's see, 3 intros. Well, that feels like the other ones. Okay. So 2 main things would be, well, the first one is intro 3 feels like it goes to main loop 3. Oh, come on. Intro 3 with that lead line feels like it goes into main loop 3. Intro 2 feels like it's more appropriate. Maybe not. This one. Yeah, it's just like the number of instruments in each one, especially main loop 1 and 3. So yeah, you've got to make sure that they can switch around. And then the other thing over here is these feel like 2-bar loops instead of intros. Yes, they have different instrumentation, but they could basically sit there and be their own loop. When you loop an intro or an ending, it should feel like it rises and builds and then drops back down again. Rises and builds and drops back. It shouldn't feel like a constant loop overall. So these feel like they are the 2 bars before the main loops, just in the same way that they would be a progression, not necessarily as much of an intro. Again, instrumentation, energy, vibe, all of that stuff works, especially maybe for like an alien invasion game. It could definitely work, but kind of the formatting and flow of the music is different. Next one would be make sure they're named endings instead of outros. And yeah. The other thing would be going away from that repeating lead line. There you go. Well, you're still climbing. I like the outro 3 sounds the most different than all the rest of the compositions or all the rest of the cues. So having variation, but moving away from the repeating melodic line, because the game loops so much as it is that if you're every 2 bars or 4 bars you're repeating the da 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 kind of vibe to it, then yeah, it gets repetitive all the way through. Definitely here in the chat, very much LTJ Bookham kind of vibe to it, a Rabbit in the Moon, all good stuff. Yeah, and so the difference with that kind of composition is that you have minutes worth of a set to develop. And so you can stay on an idea and just kind of groove on it and build and bring in instrumentation and go bring it out because, yeah, you've got minutes worth of time to fill up. But here, where you've got so many little pieces that are just going to be repeating and moving around, switching around, you want to, it's going to loop on its own enough. You want to develop as much as you can within a 4 or 8 bar phrase. All right. Very good. Lots of good ideas so far. Let's go to the next one here. Yeah, here in the chat. Yeah, it sounded more like a song, the game music, but that can be fixed. Yeah, it's more of the formatting. Yeah, and the, how it would be set up to progress. Cool. All right, I think we're good. All right. Also, got all those kind of drum bass vibes to them. Works for the pace. The only thing I would really identify, initially would identify here, would be the repetition in the melodic phrase. I like the changes from one to the next. I think they work well. I think there is good variation in drum patterns. There's good variation in the progression and the lead line. But within an 8-bar phrase, the lead especially repeats twice. So, so you state it, you have a little bit of variation, then you state the same idea again, and stated the second part again. So whatever you're doing in the second 4 bars, make it as varied and different, at least in the melody, as you have going into a new loop, right? So as I go from main loop 1 to 2, there's some really good identifiable changes, and within the second 4 bars of a main loop, you should have a similar change, but really only in the melody. You can, especially at this pace and this type of style of rhythm and all that, you can maintain the groove behind it. But just the lead line, don't repeat the same 4 bars in the first half and the second half. Cool. Yep. Otherwise, instrumentation works, vibe works. Let's see how the intros build. So I would say, again, this kind of, they feel better as 2-bar phrases as opposed to builds. So just use everything, all of the instrumentation to kind of rise up. So the lead kind of subdivides the beat. I think you kind of do it maybe here. Basically, 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 2. Can't count it for whatever reason. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So basically, you're subdividing the beat in the second 2 bars. Also use the drums. Create a fill in the second 2 bars, or kind of maybe even a snare line as to rise up through there. To create those intros and 3 endings. Cool. That works. Works also. Yeah, nothing wrong with those. They take the groove of the main loops and they kind of resolve everything in a solid way to kind of drums The drums have a little kind of fill, a little ending at the end there, and harmonic progression, bass line, everything, melody, everything resolves to that final chord. Cymbal crash at the end puts a nice period at the end of the sentence. There we go. Very good. All right. Good stuff to be listening to. Good ideas to share. Let's keep going. What do we have? 3 more. All right, next. Cool. All right, very fun, very kind of singable, catchy. Again, I think it works for the style of the game. It's got a good energy to it, and it's pretty solid melodic development through there. Let's see. Yeah, so just make sure that you are kind of highlighting the changes in the melody. Like the phrasing feels a bit similar in the first half and the second half, but I do hear that you're throwing little kind of variations through there. So whether it's just a note that goes up instead of down, or moves through the phrase in a different slight rhythmic way, just to kind of highlight those little changes through the main loops. There might be a question of how rhythmically different the main loop 3 is. Okay, you do start on a kick, so that's good. And so it all depends, like when you get it into the game. If this kind of randomly pops up too often, then it might sound like it's too much of a change, like if it just sits on it for too long. So sometimes you might want to maintain more of the kind of straight rhythm that you have through here, and but I think rhythmically it works with the halftime kind of feel. And I certainly have heard kind of stronger rhythmic changes like that definitely work. It feels like a nice little breather or breakthrough there. So I'm trying to hear on my headphones. I'm not really picking out a bass line, although you kind of have like maybe some tuned kicks, or maybe the bass just hits at the same time as the kicks, or maybe it's my headphones or whatever. But I'm not sure that the game, if we expect that it's probably going to be played on a mobile device, or it's not like somebody's going to be rocking this game on their massive home theater system or something like that. So maybe a whole bunch of low end doesn't make a bunch of sense, but yeah, just hearing maybe a bass line in there. But overall, on the other hand, I like the sort of openness and emptiness to it, where like the staccato kind of feel through there. It really kind of will also leave room for the sound effects. 3 intros. All right, so include the same instrumentation. These almost sound like musical sound effects or in stingers, where like you did something good and bing. So, and yeah, here in the chat, second one sounds kind of like an ending, because they all do resolve nicely. Well, I mean, you hit the 5. Yeah. So, and then kind of the long rest and the second bar include some instrumentation, especially drums, because you have such a strong groove when this drops over here. So having a little bit of that kick and hi-hat and snare. Yeah, so adding some of those rhythmic elements in there, adding some of the other instrumentation from the main loops will help those transitions, even especially with like a more of a build, even through these rests, so that maybe this line rests to have a little bit of added instrumentation through there. Make sure the endings don't get cut off on those, but yeah. Oops. Here it does feel maybe a little bit empty without the chords, because you're just like hitting on one last note. But it has the drums in there. Drums come to a finish. So what is there something else maybe missing? Yeah. Is there some like staccato strings back there or something? There does seem to be some other instrument layers in the main loops that could kind of fill out these endings. But compositionally they work just fine. Make sure they fade and reach silence. All right. Definitely fits the kind of fun, lightheartedness of the game. Good kind of energy and change through each of the main loops. And just make a bit more, or use more consistent instrumentation in the main loops, from the main loops into the intros and endings, if that made any sense. Okay. Cool. Next one here. Oh, where am I going? There we go. One thing I wanted to point out with this one here, as I was going through and loading up all of my files, I found that these were actually delivered as MP3 files. So watch out for that, because that is not going to loop correctly in the game. It won't play back properly. MP3 files are not, because they're compressed and all this, they're not sample accurate. It's not the right word, but they're not samples. They're chunks of audio. So they don't loop back in the same way as PCM WAV files do. But that doesn't matter to Logic, because Logic gets around the fact that they don't loop, makes them loop. Stereo. All right, here we go. So the biggest thing I hear here is the rhythm. Try for more of a steady rhythm. The percussion in the background for the kind of like clockwork sync that and rhythm of the arpeggiators. It's directly on the beat and locked to it. The rest of the percussion, and especially that snare kind of sound, feels really kind of all over the place. Or it also needs like a 2 and 4 snare to kind of pivot everything against, and then you can have a little bit more of those kind of rhythmic flair in the background, but really feels like it needs that more kind of straight ahead rhythm. I mean, you're kind of getting some good syncopation in there, but when it stops, it needs to be right on the probably a 2 or 4 somewhere. Oh, and then the arpeggiator. We got the progression, that works fine. And the arpeggiator kind of outlines it. Really needs a stronger melodic lead, or the melodic lead that's in there needs to be pushed out farther, kind of more of the focus of the mix, and needs to have more variation instead of just kind of following the chord progression. So more focus on the lead line, and without having the kind of repeated arpeggiated phrasing that follows the chord changes. And then, yeah, a kind of more solid rhythmic pattern. 3 intros. There it is. Okay, there's the pattern. I don't know, maybe not that specific pattern, but that's the rhythmic kind of integrity that works. I mean, you got the snares on 2 and 4. But even the instrumentation changes quite a bit from one to the next. So I would say kind of develop more what you're doing in the intros through the main loops, and especially using that rhythm there. And the 3 endings. Alright, so you should find one last chord to end on. Maybe beat 3 of bar 2. Let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3. And just kind of boom, and just hit that last beat 3 of bar 2 to end everything. With this one, it goes into a minor feel. Everything else is major all the way across. I know that I do say that you can certainly use a minor kind of tension in the endings. The only difference here is that you're basically following the same progression or the same pattern, the same phrasing, but just moved it to a minor key. So I would either maybe just the last chord hit a minor chord, as opposed to effectively doing a very similar idea, but just making it minor. So maybe even have the whole ending be in major until that last chord, and that hits a minor feel. 2, 3. Just kind of end it on that beat 3 of bar 2. And give yourself enough time to have everything fade out. Definitely want to watch out for the endings getting cut off. They'll sound like this. I'll just kind of stop there. So, all right. There is similarity in so much similarity in the rhythms of the intros and endings. It makes me feel like the rhythm of the main loops. Especially if I now go back over here and listen to these. Feels quite different than the intros and endings. So at least rhythmically, I would explore kind of what you were doing in the intros and endings through the main loops also. All right, and our final one here. Let's check out the main loops. All right. Cool. Come on. I think I hear like a glitch or something. Is that just me? Right here. Nope, must have been my system. Okay. All right. Everything works well. Sounds appropriate for the game. Pretty good melodic development through here. Just a little bit, maybe too much repetition through this first main loop. But it does change here in the last 2 bars. Good change in the rhythm into the second main loop. And then, yeah, you've got the kind of a double time feel through the third main loop. I maybe could bring up the same point of when we listened to the previous one up here that had the kind of halftime feel. Oh, where did it go? Everything was this one, where everything was at a kind of a straight ahead time, and then it went into a halftime kind of feel. Oops. So there might be comments on the other side where if this one kind of gets chosen too much, it may kind of throw off the overall rhythm and pace, but I think it could definitely work. I like the energy through it, and yeah, good instrumentation choice and melodic development. 3 intros. So watch out for resolving back to the tonic on the intros, because more than likely, right, you're starting on the tonic over here, over here. Yep. So if you if you end on that same note, it will kind of repeat when it goes into one of the main loops. Here. Right, because we got this one. So watch out for that. Even that one did an octave. So may not end each one of these intros on the tonic. Should and go up to the maybe 7th or something like that. Maybe rise up instead of headed back down. And endings. Cool. Feel like time is running out or something with the double time. Each one kind of doubles the previous one. Oh no. Oops. Let's see. I'll play all 3 of them. And then time starts running out, gets a little faster, and then, oh no, level's about to end. Cool. All right. So I think these 2 work. This one just doesn't end soon enough. So, and just kind of hold this last chord. Don't hit this last little note there. So, I think that that gets us. Let's see. Go back over here. Yeah. So, good work through the main loops, and yeah, work on a little bit of tweaks on the intros and endings. And I think we did good. Everybody had some good stuff to check out. One thing I always want to point out is that it's really not. Most folks, it was not a case of like, oh no, that just completely didn't work and scrap everything and start all over again. Most of it was comments on the new aspect or the fact that it is set up for a game. Like if these were set up as linear compositions where you're just verse, chorus, A, B kind of form to it, then yeah, it's compositionally, instrumentationally, there was not too many challenges there. But it was the fact that, okay, how is this going to loop? How is this going to transition? How comments on repetition or consistency of instrumentation as it jumps from one to the next. Whoa, excuse me. A lot of that stuff is for the fact that it is a game, right? So that's a new format. It's a new approach, all those sorts of things. So good work overall. Hope that kind of brings light, again, for everybody that submitted. Excellent work, and I hope this kind of encourages more people to submit next round now that you've seen kind of how we go about this, and the more the merrier. And for each individual person, you get the own feedback, but for everybody else, we got 9 different versions of how you might approach this project, which often triggers a lot of other ideas and like, oh, never thought about that. That works, or wow, that really doesn't work, or whatever it is. So you do have the opportunity to revise and change anything. You are going to be placing the music in the game in week 3, and so you can take any of this feedback from our first 2 compositions this week and next week. Well, I guess last week and this week. And make any changes for the final version. At the end of the month, you will have 2 working games with your music and sound effects in them. And you'll be doing video captures to kind of have a demo. The whole one of our big purposes of all this is to create more portfolio demo project work, so you can show off how your music works in the game. So that is our intention. That's our direction. Now I'm going to turn it over to the archive, which will discuss the new assignments for week 2. You are going to be, where did it go? Here we go. You got your new game called Angry Bots this week, and sound design for that game also. So if you have any questions, I'll stick around here for a few minutes. And other than that, we'll actually, I do want to give a heads up that, and I need to post this up on FSO for everybody, no live class on Thursday. I've had to go out of town on Thursday, so I do have an archive, and I will be posting that up. But please, I will be available through email, so send me any messages, FSO or whatever, to chat about any concerns you might have. And other than that, we're back after our break. We're back on schedule, and we'll kind of go at the same schedule throughout the rest of the month. So, all right, let me know if you have any questions. But other than that, have a good afternoon, and I'll see you again next time. Thanks. Let's discuss your project for this week. Our new game called Angry Bots. So as I mentioned, where'd it go? Hopefully you took the opportunity to download this week's game. Maybe you have played it and taken a chance to get a sense of what the game's about. Maybe took a look through the documentation. But a new game this week requires a new style of music and a new music soundtrack and new sound effects. Now that you've gone through the process once, you basically have the structure or the schedule for everything, and we're going to follow very much the same flow for Angry Bots, where this week you'll do the composition, next week you'll do all of the sound design, and you'll put it into the game and create a video capture. So this game, again, is called Angry Bots. It is made by Unity Games using the Unity game engine. We'll talk a bit more about that this week as we dive into some of the technology of getting your music to work actually in the game. The Unity game engine is a very popular tool to make all sorts of different types of games. If you play a lot of mobile games, iOS and Android games, then more than likely you've played something that's been built on the Unity game engine. And Angry Bots here is a kind of a game demo where not only is it a game, but you can actually get access to all of the art and the music and the sound and the code and the program, like all the pieces of it. And so the people that were learning art can tear it apart on that side, and the people that are learning code and programming can tear apart a game project like this from that point of view. And we over here on the music and sound team are going to reference it and use it as a demo for showing off our music and sound. So this type of game, it's a much number one, it's a much more full and complete game. It does actually take like 5 or 10 minutes to get through from beginning to end. It does actually have an end. It is what might be considered like a complete game level of a much larger game. It is kind of certainly a darker and grittier style overall. It's modern and kind of futuristic, a much more intense feel than 2D platformer from last round. It is having this sort of modern approach to the game, or kind of futuristic feel. You are this mercenary who's infiltrating the robot factory, and the robots are certainly not happy that you're there, and so they are there to take you out, and you're going to battle your way deeper and deeper into this factory. So there are battles that are constantly happening, and that's one of the main thing. Well, that is the main thing that we are directing our music from. The main musical idea that we're focused on in this composition is the idea of ambient and action. Our music is going to need to transition smoothly between ambient gameplay and action gameplay, where ambient doesn't refer, like, it's not a room tone or rain or anything. It's not like a sound effect ambience. It also doesn't mean the genre of ambient music, meaning that it's just like slow and drone and boring and doesn't move or change. Ambient just means less than action. There's no battle going on at that point. So this is often referred to as battle and exploration. So during exploration, you're just kind of wandering around. There's no bad guys around. All of a sudden, a robot jumps out or a bad guy jumps out, and the action music kicks in. And we have to be able to switch musically, seamlessly back and forth between a lower intensity ambient game state and a higher intensity action game state. question here in the chat. Do you think a minor key signature would be appropriate for this game? Absolutely. For this, you're going for intense and battles and firefights and robots and explosions and heroic and adventure and all of these big and intense ideas. It's a lot easier to get away with that in a minor key, even with some kind of diminished tonality to it, where it you can get that intensity and that tension from a minor key, versus with a major key, it's going to be sometimes what I'll get in the music is it's like too laid back and chill or happy. That's the problem with a major key in this instance. Unless you're going for strictly heroic and I've already won and beat the game, then a major key works can work a bit better. But sometimes what I get is, hey, maybe the robots aren't so bad with this music, or I get like happy dance party with the music, where it's upbeat and like a strong dance beat, but it's still like not too dark and intense, and like you have to imagine that these robots are chasing you with lasers and rocket launchers, and they are really mad that you're there, and certainly you're there to defeat them, and nobody's happy about it. So you want to avoid anything that's too slow or laid back or easy or happy or too silly or anything like that. You want to make sure that you're going for that tension, that intensity, that aggressiveness, that that action feel as you go back and forth. So let me switch over real quick to the PDF. Where is that? When you not only do you get the video here and the game, you get a PDF that looks like this. And let me go through a couple of things, and I'll talk about the actual WAV files and the delivery and like what you're actually creating here. Game overview. It's going to talk a lot about ambient and action. This is really a summary of everything that I'm talking about here, where, and this is a very common approach in games. Angry Bots is known as a third-person shooter, which means most of the game you're battling some evil bad guy, and you've got either a laser or a machine. In this case, you're equipped with like a machine gun, and you are constantly going back and forth between moving through the level and actually engaging and battling with an enemy. Very, very common approach in games, and this is a challenge that a lot of games and a lot of game composers encounter. I have to quickly and musically go back and forth between lower intensity and higher intensity, and I have no clue when it's going to happen. So what we do is we create music at lower intensity and higher intensities, and we figure out a way to transition back and forth. So, and we'll talk about how that is going to work. How to play. Maybe you've already gotten a chance to play the game. Definitely take the chance, play the game, get a sense or a feel of it. If you're familiar with mouse and keyboard gaming, then WASD work, or you can use the arrow keys to move forward, back, left, and right. The mouse aims, and left click fires the weapon. Reference listening. There's a couple of different game soundtracks to reference in this sort of style. Musical style, high-end energy, over-the-top music production style, like fast electronic or epic metal. Big, loud, strong, intense music styles definitely help this composition, this project. So rock, metal, electronic, heavy orchestral, that type of instrumentation will work. Synths, large pads, driving bass lines, gated effects, sweeping filters, bouncing delays, fast percussion, heavy distorted guitars, big fast drums, large brass and strings, cymbal swells. All of those are just big, loud, strong, impactful instruments. So that is the main theme, the main aesthetic that we're going for. Music system, more about ambient and action, and I'll take you on a play-by-play here in a little bit. And also I got some examples to show off with screenshots and a bit of information about each one of the cues. And here at the asset list. All right. So ultimately, what you will be delivering are 7 audio files. And they are an ambient loop that is going to be over a minute long. All of these are going to be 16-bit 44.1 stereo files. Ambient loop, then 3 action loops. They're each going to be 8 bars. The ambient loop is heard when you are not battling with one of the robots. The action cues are heard when you are battling with one of the robots. And there are 3 different types of robots. Each gets their own individual action theme. Those action themes are only 8 bars. You might have noticed in the video that the battles are really quite short. You don't have to, it doesn't really take all that long to actually defeat one of these robots. So you want to make sure that the music doesn't constantly jump in and jump out and on and off. So we have to, we'll have to address that aspect of it. But the 8 bars, most of the battles are not going to even make it through 8 bars of music. Or even if it just loops one time, that'll take up most of the battles. So beyond, these are the main 4 pieces of music that's mostly going to be heard. Music stingers. The stingers are there. Notice that they're really short, only 1 to 3 seconds, and they are strong, sharp impacts that are meant to hide the transition between ambient and action. So let me take a moment here. I'm going to go back to the video and give you the play-by-play of how this is going to work. Actually, let me take one quick pause here before we get into this and let the video roll. Let me know if you have any questions so far. Okay. Let me back this up here. So, I'm going to start talking about the ambient and the action cues first. We have one ambient cue that is a minute long. It's the longest file because it's going to be heard most often. Then your 3 action cues, those are each 8 bars long, and those happen when the battles happen. So let's talk about how the game knows how to switch back and forth between these pieces of music. If nothing else is happening, and from the start of the game, you hear the ambient cue. If the player just finds a corner and just stands there forever, they are going to hear that ambient cue. Here in the chat, how long can we go on with the ambient music? The cue is supposed to be 1 minute to 2 minutes long. I have some examples, and I'll kind of discuss more of the content and what they might sound like here in a bit. Ambient. So if nothing else is happening, they're going to hear that ambient cue. So that's why it's so long. If they just stand around doing nothing, it's just going to keep going around and around. So then, how does the game know when to switch to action? And then how does the game know when to switch back to ambient? And we said that the action music is heard during the battles. So then how does the game know when the battles are happening? So let's go through this. So the ambient cue plays. This robot here is called the buzzer bot. And it's kind of like flies around, and it's meant to be like annoying, I think, and zaps you. It has this laser, like a lightning bolt that comes out, shoots out right there, and zaps you, and just kind of flies around. It doesn't take much to defeat it, and it would just kind of keep flying around and keep zapping you. So this is a battle, right? As soon as it zaps you and you fire it at it, there's some battle going on. So we need to have the game know that that's happening. So the real answer here is that the game uses health points in the game to determine when the battles start and stop. So your character has health points, and the enemy robot has health points. You have a whole lot more health points than any one robot. So it takes a lot of hits on you constantly all the way through the level to do much damage. But for a robot, it really doesn't have much damage or much health points, so it doesn't take all that much to defeat it. So as soon as somebody loses health points, the game is going to switch from ambient to action. So the game always knows which characters are on screen. It knows which robots are there, and it knows where your character is. So as soon as somebody takes damage, as soon as you get zapped here, the game says, oh, the main player has taken damage, so that must mean the battle has started. So we are going to switch from ambient over to action. And this happens immediately. It hard cuts from one to the next. And you are not guaranteed in where you are going to be in the ambient queue when this switch happens. So it's just going to hard cut from one to the next. And that works because you're in battle now. You just got lost health points. You just took damage. All right, now it's on. We're going to battle for a little bit. And then somebody's going to win, somebody's going to lose, and the music will have to shift. So from the beginning of the game, the ambient cue is playing until somebody takes damage. And at that point, the action music starts. And then until at some point, somebody is at 0 health. Either your character, but more than likely it's one of the robots. So that robot now goes to 0 health, and the game knows that the battle is over. So it doesn't immediately hard cut back to the ambient queue. It's a strong change in intensity. Going from lower intensity ambient music to higher intensity action music works because it's kind of like when your friend jumps out around the corner and scares you, your heartbeat kind of just skyrockets. It like jumps up real quick and it's pounding suddenly, and your natural reaction is that your heartbeat can jump up very, very quickly. So the pace of the music can jump up quickly because now the battle has started. But when your friend jumps out and you realize, oh, it's just your friend and there's no danger, well, your heartbeat doesn't just drop back to where it was. You have to breathe a little bit and calm yourself down, and it returns back to where it was. So we're going to do the same thing with the music. Going from ambient into action, from lower intensity to higher intensity, we're just going to make a sudden jump up. But when the battle is over and you're going from high intensity to low intensity music, we're going to slowly crossfade over 3 seconds to return it back down to normal before the next battle starts. So ambient music is heard. Zap, now the action music instantly hard cuts. Battle is now over, and it crossfades out for 3 seconds. Next one. These are called spider bots, and they're basically like bombs on legs. They jump awake there, and they chase you. They don't have any attack until they get close enough, and then they just kind of explode. So, same sort of thing here. When these guys jump awake like that, they kind of light up. You can see here, this guy jumps, just kind of like pops up. Then the action music immediately starts. With these guys, the battle music or the action music starts when they turn on or they wake up. So this spider action cue plays 8 bars. It loops around and around. Here it would probably play a little longer because I kind of just toy with it and dance around. But eventually, either you destroy it or it gets close enough and it self-destructs. So here's another one. As soon as this jumps awake, the spider action music would start. The battle goes until it's over, and then after 3 seconds, it fades back to the ambient cue. And then as the player progresses through and explores through the level, they're going to hear the ambient cue until the next robot. As this guy jumps awake, then it switches to the spider music instantly, battle's over, and over 3 seconds it fades back. This robot is called the mech bot, coming down the hallway here. It's sort of like a boss battle. A little bit more. It takes a little bit more to beat these guys. They're bigger and slower, and they cause more damage. So typically, this is going to be the biggest, strongest part of your composition. These guys are going to be big and have big percussion and drums and strong bass lines and loud, rhythmic, powerful music. With this composition, you can have more variation in the instruments than you did in 2D platformer. When we talked about 2D platformer, we said that all of the cues need to have similar instrumentation so that it seems consistent and almost invisible as it jumps from one to the next. With this one, you should have more change and variation in the instruments that you choose from your spider action cue and your buzzer action cue and your mech action cue. You should have instrumentation that represents each one of these robots. So even if it's not on screen yet, you still can hear it and you know which one's coming for you. So your choice of instruments will match the overall approach or style of that particular robot. So let's listen to some examples here. And I will also talk about the stingers. All right, let's see if this works. So what I have here, these are 4 student submissions. This first column over here are ambient cues. They're about a minute long, minute to 2 minutes, and they are set up or meant to loop. Over here I have action cues. These are each 8 bars long, and each cue represents its own robot. So the instruments and the melodic theme and the rhythms should sort of reflect the feel of that particular robot coming after you. And over here, these are stingers. I'm going to talk a bit more about these as we listen to them and figure out what their use is. So we'll start here with the first ambient cue. So it starts out as just a kind of a pad or a drone, which it shouldn't just be a pad or drone all the way through. There needs to be a bit of rhythm, maybe even a melodic theme or idea, and there needs to be change in the instrumentation. Here comes a strong change. So sometimes I discuss the ambient cue could be thought of more like musical sound design. There is a couple of ways to approach it. You could go with something that is more traditional composition, where you have drums, bass, harmony, and melody, and use and develop those ideas over the minute cue. Or you could use it as more texture and tones, taking more of a musical sound design approach. So it is using musical instruments, using synths, using effects and processing to create more of an interesting soundscape overall that might include or probably should include a bit of rhythm. Do you have having a little bit of percussion or rhythm in there foreshadows the pace that you have coming up in the action cues. So change and development, one of the biggest things that I find when grading these is that the instrumentation, once it's established in the ambient cue, doesn't really change all that much. So you want to make sure that you have variation and development over the course of the cue. With the action loops, or the action cues, these are set up to loop. They are 8 bars. They need to be strong and intense. One of the main things we're listening for compositionally is making sure that the action cues are the loudest and strongest portion of your mix. However big and loud and strong you make the ambient cue, your action cues just need to be even bigger and louder and stronger. So typically full drum kit or strong kick snare pattern, a memorable lead that is recognizable for that particular robot, powerful bass lines. Intensity is the main thing that we're listening for. So here are, we have one 8-bar cue for the buzzer cue, we have one for the mech, and we have one for spider. Set up to loop. There should be some variation and difference between the first 4 bars and the second 4 bars. You'll hear this mech cue has different instrumentation. Kind of represents a different feel for the cue. Third one here, spider. So you can hear that each one has its own rhythm. It has its own melodic and harmonic and strong bass instrumentation. So these are going to create a particular voice or theme for that robot. And making sure as we go back and forth, you are probably best to maintain a similar key as you switch back and forth between the ambient and all 3 action cues. That way there isn't a strong harmonic jump between the 2 cues, especially as you're kind of going back and forth pretty quickly. You typically want to maintain a similar tempo through all of the cues, but use double time and half time to create variations in the rhythm. So in your action cues, let's see, this buzzer cue is more of what I would consider the base tempo of everything. Then the mech has more of a halftime feel because it's a bigger robot, stronger, kind of lumbering around. Well, they're actually at a similar tempo and feel, but they both have a halftime feel. Then with the spider cue, it's got more of a double time feel. Sitting on those eighth notes because it kind of matches like the skittering feet of the spider bot as it roams the level. So using things like halftime and double time can definitely help create the intensity change as you move back and forth. In the chat here, I would like to create more of a soundscape for the ambient cue, but I'm not very good at composing electronic music styles. Do you think there's a way to go between electronic sounds for the ambience and orchestral for the action? I might actually go for orchestral for the ambient because you have more time to develop melodic and harmonic ideas, and then with the action cues, since they're short and meant to be much more intense and a little bit kind of techy and robotic, switching over to action for those, especially since you may not feel as comfortable with the action or with the electronic side of things. So yeah, the answer is yes. You can go, well, I wouldn't say entirely go back and forth. Probably a better way of approaching is, let's say you do most kind of more of an electronic feel for the ambient cue. Have some strain of orchestral instrument, maybe a cello or some brass risers or something in the ambient cue that's then much more focused in the action cue, and the same both ways. So whichever order you choose the different genres, then have an instrument or a layer of each one of them in the other ones so that it's not just such a strong difference between them. So all right. Yeah, I would think those would be good approaches for that. Now, I want to talk about the stinger cues and their use here. Two issues with how the music is going to switch by itself. As I mentioned, when we go from ambient to action, it is a hard cut. So I'm going to fake all of this and set this up in Logic here. So let's say we were rolling through our ambient cue, and then a buzzer bot came out to attack, and we are going to hard cut from one to the next. Let me just make sure that that's somewhat lined up. It's going to hard cut from ambient over to action. You know what? I'm just going to do it all on the same track. So I'm going to just drag these around. It's going to hard cut from ambient over to action. And then when action is done, it is going to crossfade back into ambient. So let me create a crossfade here. Something like that. Now the game, of course, is going to do this way better than I am. Just clicking around here in Logic. But general idea is ambient loop plays, buzzerBot jumps. The battle starts with the buzzerBot. It hard cuts from one to the next. You beat the buzzerBot. It crossfades out over 3 seconds and fades in over 3 seconds back to the ambient loop. I have no idea if that's actually 3 seconds, but hopefully we can get the idea here. So I think here's the ambient cue. and it's going to hard cut over to the buzzer. And the battle's over, and it's going to crossfade back to ambient. And goes back to ambient and allows the whole process to start all over again. So one thing you might notice is that change and transition in the buzzer cue is very sudden. And so having some instrumentation of the ambient cue also present in the action cues helps that transition a little bit. But the stingers also help that quite a bit. So the stingers are going to sit here. Go off the fade tool. They're going to sit right, oh my goodness, I lost it. Right where the action cue comes in. And they are there to help this transition so that it isn't so sudden. It kind of takes attention, distracts, and says, hey, look over here, listen to this real quick while I switch from one to the next. And it also provides randomness and variation. Every time you battle one of the buzzer bots, you are going to hear that exact same buzzer bot action cue. But each time it's going to randomly choose one of 3 stingers to play at the front to create some variation, some randomization. So let's try this. I don't even know if this is going to work or sound correct, but whatever. We'll see what it sounds like. And it sounds very, very quiet. That's what it sounds like. So it provides a little variation there, so that it creates distraction, and there's change every single time one of these plays. Yeah. So you got that. You got one there. Got one there. This is less than exciting. This one's kind of less than exciting. This one works very well. So a stinger should be a short, sharp impact that using musical instrumentation. It should not have anything rhythmic or harmonic or melodic, because that can run the issue of clashing with the action cues. So you want to make sure that it hits really hard and then gets out of the way very quickly. Here's some other stingers. This is a bad example of a stinger, right? That's just like a short 90s orchestra hit. That one works all right. I would say that is the most basic form of a stinger, which is like a big bass drum or kick drum and a cymbal crash. And it's more of like a sound effect. Every once in a while I'll hear sound effects. You got to watch out for that. Let's see how well these work. These work well. These are more like, if you're familiar with EDM drops, big builds and impacts with kicks and cymbal crashes and turnarounds, there should be, those are very good kind of templates for this kind of sound. They should not be a musical phrase like this. This is another bad example. So musical phrases that have rhythm and tone to them are just going to cause issue when they're played against the action cues. So something that's quick, something that has a sharp, strong impact at the front, something typically with a big bass hit or bass drop in it, something with often a cymbal crash works, and then some cool modulating sound that either kind of twists and turns or gates or stutters or there's all sorts of fun effects that you can use right along with it. So stingers, again, are there to cause distraction and create some variation in the playback of your music. Let me try some other ones here. So here is an ambient cue. This one's more like what I would consider a traditional composition, with progression and melody, rhythm, and changes throughout the cue. And then there is, here's the action cues. So you make sure that it brings up the intensity and pace of the music. So hopefully these are going to be giving you some good ideas and direction for this composition, and ways that you might head. Other ideas here. Make sure your composition matches the genre of the game. Again, it's much more of a stylistic approach than 2D platformer. We did leave 2D platformer a bit more wide open to your compositional approach to it. So this make sure you match the style and feel. Ambient and action need to transition immediately. So keeping the same rhythm, key, and similar instrumentation between both helps that process. Action transitions back to ambient after 3 seconds. You don't know when anything is going to be triggered, so watch out for timing differences. Tempo changes, time signature changes, all of that cause just rhythmic hardships in your composition. Most of the rest of that is stuff that is pretty standard. Okay, so take a look through the PDF, watch the video, play the game, start getting some compositional ideas together with the other half of our Angry Bots project. Now that you have finished out the composition, we move into the sound design for this week. And it is very entertaining sound design, lots of fun stuff in there. It's all weapons and robots and explosions and lasers and missiles, all sorts of fun, kind of interesting sound design for this game. So the approach to doing the sound design is very similar for Angry Bots as it was for 2D platformer. There's less kind of silly sounds and fun sounds that you can just do with the microphone. It's a lot more designed overall, but still got some good stuff to look forward to. So for this, we're going to set it up in much the same way that you did for 2D platformer. I would suggest that you create a brand new session in Logic or your favorite DAW. and you are going to import all of the original sounds from the game. I'm going to create one new track here. And hold on just a moment. Let me go get a copy of the game. There we go. Let's do this. All right. Here is a copy of Angry Bots. And you've already navigated to find all of the sounds and put your own music into the game. But we'll do it like this. We'll go to Show Package Contents. And we'll get a folder called Contents. And we are going to Data. We're going to Streaming Assets. And we're going to Sound Effects. Yeah, I'll just pull these. I think I backed them up at some point. So here are all of the original sound effects. And if I go into, let me do this. Pull this over here. Oops. Move this out of the way. Bring Logic back up. No? Come on, Logic. There you are. I'm going to take all of those sounds that I just found, and I'm going to pull them into a Logic session right here and drop them on a track, and I'm going to tell Logic to put them all on one track, place all files on one track. And then you would probably spend some time separating all of these out. Make your life a whole lot easier as you organize it. But then you would create a couple of tracks directly below. New tracks. And you would build on these tracks. So, like I mentioned before, you would kind of separate these out. Hello. No selection? There we go. Come on, Logic, cooperate with me. There we go. Just make some space in between each one of them so that you have some clear space to build everything and work with the session. I'm just going to switch over here and play the sounds. These are all of the sounds that you will create. There are a whole lot of explosions and doors in this game. So I would, you have access to the Westar library. You also have access to freesound.org. Those are good resources for sound effects, source sound effects to work on this project. And I would suggest that you go find a large group of sounds and bring them in and edit them all in one shot, as opposed to going one at a time. So I would go find, you know that you have quite a few explosion sounds. Flying buzzer, destroyed explosion, patrol mech, destroyed explosion, missile explosion. Figure out all of the certain types of explosion types of sounds that you need. then go into the search engine and find the particular types of sound effects that you can use, a whole group of them, bring them back into Logic and edit them all down and create different versions for the different explosions that you might need. As opposed to saying, okay, we need an explosion, one sound, going out, finding the sound, bringing it back in, editing it, naming and bouncing it, then saying, oh, I need another explosion. Go back, find another explosion sound, bring it back in. It'll probably save you a couple of trips overall. Westar has been acting up, I guess, because of the traffic. Every once in a while, we run into a message that says maximum number of downloads has been exceeded or something like that. And it is typically reset after a couple of days, something to that effect. So if you are getting issues with Westar, there also is a new login and password that you can find. I think it was set up already when you did the looping assignment, but if not, it's in that the new password is in that assignment or it's on FSO. So anyway, you go out and you find your sounds. Let's go ahead and listen to all of these sounds and give a couple of suggestions on your overall approach to this. Let me make sure that everybody will be able to hear these and they won't be too loud, hopefully. Hold on. Let me check my levels. Okay. All right, no problem, Michael. Thank you. Oh, I guess not there. All right, let's see. Let's try that. Let's try this. All right. So this is called airlock door close and then airlock door open. All right, that looks like it's working. So airlock door open and close. A lot of times you can get away with the close being the reverse of the open, or at least starting with that. Often you need like a ka-chunk at the end as the door actually like closes and maybe locks. But it's a good way of taking a sound and reversing it to be able to get either the open or close that you need, because it always is often a rising pitch to go up and a downward pitch to go down. The next one here, then we have exterior rain and interior hum. Right, these are pretty long samples. Rain, just go out and find a rain loop. Interior hum is often you can look for room tone. That's a very common search term, or air conditioning, or find like an empty office or something like that. So those are longer loops. They need to be able to loop because your player could just be sitting there forever. And they're longer here, but they don't necessarily need to be, your version need to be that long. Flying buzzer destroyed explosion. Here's our first explosion. That is when you destroy the buzzer. Zap electric is when it zaps you. You hear that right at the beginning of the game. Then we have a couple of sounds for the patrol mech. This is the big RoboCop looking robot as it comes after you. This is the alert when it first notices you. Destroyed explosion. This is at least this sound is a massively huge explosion. It kind of works for the big robot. I do think it's a bit of overkill overall, but this is the destroyed explosion. Does have a cool little bit of clipping in there that works for the explosion. Patrol Mech Footstep 1 and 2. I think they cheat a little bit and they just put the same sound as for 1 and 2. You should probably have a little bit of difference between 1 and 2 so that you can hear like basic. It refers to like left foot, right foot as it goes back and forth. So maybe even just a little bit of pitch difference between the two will give you that variation. Missile explosion. This is when the big patrol mech shoots at you. No, that is sorry. When it sorry, that was, missile explosions when it hits a wall. Shoot missiles when it actually shoots it. So those are quite large missile sounds for the patrol mech attack. Enemy spider. This is the alert sound when it wakes up. Then we have, let's kind of move this out of the way. Destroyed explosion. That is when you destroy the enemy robot, the enemy spider. This is spider proximity. This is one very short beep. As the spider gets closer and closer to you, it beeps. The beep gets faster and faster. So by proximity, the closer you are, the faster it beeps. The game does all of that for you. You just have to provide one very short beep. If it's too long and it goes it beeps really fast in the game, then it stacks up and doesn't sound. It doesn't work too well. Enemy spider self-destruct when it's a bomb on legs. When it goes off, it has this sound. I think this is a pretty horrible explosion. It's not a very good sound for being an explosion, especially compared to the other explosions in the game. Interior door open and close. This is the close. This is the open. All of the doors in the game are all like futuristic Star Trek doors where they just walk up to them, they move automatically. So it's not. Sometimes I hear like somebody grabs doorknob and wooden door opens and closes. That's not what these doors are. These are like some sort of motorized version of that. It needs to like sliding doors. You can try servos and pneumatics, hydraulics, that kind of stuff, where you get a sort of motorized movement sound. Locked. The next one here is called locked door opening. Maybe. When you hack the computers and you can enter the doors, they automatically open for you at that point. That's just a tone for that. This is when the player gets hit. This is the player shooting the weapon. Now, something to point out with that weapon, and I'm going to look at the waveform over here. This is the player shooting. All right, so is this going to work here? Hello, fader. Okay, so that is the gunshot in the game. There are 12 shots. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. There are 12 bullet shots in this wave file. And your shot, it doesn't have to be a bullet, it could be a laser, it could be a whatever kind of weapon you want it to be, but you should follow that waveform because I think it's timed to the animation of the muzzle flash in the game. There's a little bit of a light effect that kind of flashes on and off, and you should be able to time the two together. So pay attention to how that sound is set up. The last one here is called terminal hacked. This is when you stand next to the computer in the game. It, again, quote unquote, hacks it. And here, it's a very computery electronic sound. I've heard people do like a voice prompt. They can have it be a robotic voice, even almost like Siri or something like that. It just says terminal hacked. Or I've had people sound like typing on a keyboard, or again, more kind of computery electronic tone like that. Whatever you find that works the best. So all of these sounds are 16-bit 441K stereo files. You should, again, build all of your tracks and sounds in a single session on multiple tracks, lay out all of the different wave files across the original ones across a track here. Of course, when you bounce, you will have this muted. These original sounds will never end up in your actual custom sound effects, but they're just there as a guide when you're building everything. So hopefully that gives you some good direction there for your sound design.